The rain fell in steady sheets, casting shimmering reflections across the city streets. Alexander Whitmore stepped out of his black town car, the damp night clinging to his tailored suit. The towering building he called home loomed above him, its grandeur as cold and unwelcoming as the December wind biting at his skin. It was just another late night after a long day, and he was eager to escape into the quiet solitude of his penthouse. As he approached the grand staircase leading to the building's entrance, a sound stopped him. It wasn't the usual hum of distant traffic or the slap of rain against the pavement. It was softer, more fragile, the faint cry of a child. Alexander frowned, his steps slowing as he scanned the dimly lit area. At first, he saw nothing unusual, but as he climbed the first step, his gaze caught on a shadowy figure huddled in the corner. There, curled up against the marble banister, was a boy no older than 12. His clothes were soaked through, clinging to his thin frame, and his arms cradled something close to his chest. Alexander squinted, realizing it wasn't something. It was someone, a baby, wrapped in a tattered blanket, its tiny face red and tear-streaked. The boy flinched as Alexander approached, his wide, wary eyes darting up to meet the older man's. Alexander stopped a few steps away, raising his hands slightly as if to show he meant no harm. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his deep voice softened by concern. The boy hesitated, clutching the baby tighter. We have nowhere else to go," he murmured, his voice trembling. Alexander's heart tightened, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. The boy looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that came from more than just a sleepless night. "You're freezing," Alexander said, pulling off his scarf. "Come inside. We can talk there." The boy shook his head, backing further into the shadows. "We don't need your help," he insisted, though his voice betrayed a note of desperation. Alexander knelt down, ignoring the rain soaking into his trousers. "Listen," he said gently, "I'm not going to hurt you, but you can't stay out here. The baby needs warmth, food. Let me help." For a long moment, the boy stared at him, torn between mistrust and the undeniable need to protect the child in his arms. Finally, he nodded, his shoulders sagging in defeat. Inside the warmth of the penthouse, the contrast to the cold street below was staggering. The boy sat stiffly on the edge of a plush sofa, the baby still cradled tightly against him. Alexander handed him a towel and a steaming cup of tea. "What's your name?" he asked, taking a seat across from him. "Noah," the boy replied after a pause. "And the baby?" "Lily." Noah glanced down at her, brushing a damp curl from her tiny forehead. "She's my sister." Alexander nodded slowly. "Where are your parents?" Noah's expression darkened, and he looked away. "Gone," he said shortly. "It's just us now." Alexander studied him, sensing the weight of the boy's words, but choosing not to press further. "How long have you been out there?" "Couple of days," Noah admitted, his voice barely audible. "Our grandma, she passed away last week. We didn't have anywhere else to go." Alexander's chest tightened again, the boy's story hitting closer to home than he expected. He had grown up with wealth and privilege, but he hadn't been immune to loss. He knew the hollowness it left behind. "Why here?" he asked gently. "Why this building?" Noah hesitated, reaching into the pocket of his ragged jacket. He pulled out a small, weathered photograph and held it out to Alexander. "I was trying to find him," he said. "My dad. Grandma said he lived in this neighborhood. She gave me this." Alexander took the photograph, his breath catching as he looked at the faded image. It was of a young woman, her smile warm and familiar. Too familiar. Annabelle. His hand trembled slightly as he set the photo down on the table. "Who told you this man was your father?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "Grandma," Noah replied. "She said he never knew about me. She didn't think it was right to tell him back then, but—" His voice trailed off, and he shrugged. "I don't know if it's true. I just thought, maybe he could help us." Alexander's mind raced. The image of Annabelle burned into his thoughts. 13 years had passed since she had vanished from his life without explanation. Now, sitting across from him, was a boy who might be her son. His son. He leaned forward, his gaze meeting Noah's. Do you know your mother's name? Noah nodded. Annabelle, he said softly. The room fell silent, the only sound the soft, rhythmic breathing of the now-sleeping baby. Alexander's world seemed to shift beneath him, his carefully constructed life cracking open to reveal the past he thought he'd buried. All right, he said finally, his voice firm but kind. You'll stay here tonight. Both of you. We'll figure this out together. Noah blinked, surprise flashing in his eyes. Why would you do that? Alexander hesitated, a lump forming in his throat. Because I think you might be my son. The following morning, sunlight poured through the wide glass windows of the penthouse, casting a golden hue across the room. Alexander stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee machine as it brewed his usual blend, his mind far from its hum. He had spent most of the night pacing, piecing together fragments of the past and wondering if it was even possible. Could Noah truly be his son? The idea unsettled him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Behind him, a small voice broke the silence. Is it okay if I feed Lily? Noah asked, holding the baby bottle Alexander had placed on the counter earlier. He looked hesitant, like he was unsure if he was allowed to touch anything. Alexander turned, offering a faint smile. Of course. She's your sister. You don't need to ask. Noah nodded and settled into the couch with Lily, cradling her carefully as he fed her. Alexander watched from the kitchen, his gaze softening. The boy's care and tenderness toward his sister were undeniable. Despite everything life had thrown at him, Noah carried a quiet strength that impressed Alexander. Do you have any family, Mr. Whitmore? Noah asked suddenly, not looking up. The question caught Alexander off guard. He hesitated before replying. Not anymore. My parents passed years ago, and I never married. He paused, his voice lowering. I didn't think I had children. Noah's brow furrowed, but he didn't respond. Alexander could tell the boy was processing his words, trying to make sense of everything. The truth was, Alexander was doing the same. The photograph, Noah's story, and the name Annabelle. It was all too much to dismiss as coincidence. Yet, doubt lingered, gnawing at him. By mid-morning, Alexander decided he needed answers. He stepped into his home office and made a call to one of the best private investigators in the city, a man named Conrad Miller. The call was brief, but the instructions were clear. Find out everything there was to know about Annabelle's life after she disappeared, and confirm if Noah was truly his son. Alexander hated the uncertainty, the limbo of not knowing. He needed the truth, no matter what it revealed. When he returned to the living room, Noah was rocking Lily back and forth, humming softly. For a moment, the sight struck Alexander with a pang of emotion he couldn't quite place. It was almost domestic, this image of a boy and his sister finding comfort in each other despite the chaos of their lives. Do you go to school, Noah? Alexander asked, sitting down across from him. Noah shook his head. Not since Grandma got sick. I stayed home to take care of her and Lily. He glanced up, his expression defensive, as if bracing for judgment. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. That was a big responsibility. You've done well taking care of your sister. The boy relaxed slightly, his shoulders losing some of their tension. Grandma said family always takes care of each other. She was the only family we had left. Alexander felt a stab of guilt. If Noah was his son, then he had been part of that family all along. He just hadn't known it. The thought unsettled him further, filling him with a strange mix of regret and resolve. Over the next few days, Alexander tried to create a sense of stability for the children. He arranged for a doctor to visit the penthouse to check on Lily, ensuring she was healthy despite the rough conditions they had endured. He also stocked the kitchen with enough food to satisfy even Noah's growing appetite. The boy ate cautiously at first, as if afraid it would all be taken away, but gradually he began to trust that the kindness wasn't temporary. Meanwhile, Conrad Miller's investigation progressed. Alexander received updates daily, though the information was slow to piece together. Annabelle had left behind only fragments of her life, sporadic employment records, a trail of addresses, and vague hints of struggles she never shared with him. It wasn't enough to paint a full picture, but it was enough to confirm one thing. Annabelle had given birth to a son around the time she disappeared. Do you remember your mom well? Alexander asked Noah one evening as they sat in the living room. Lily was asleep in a makeshift crib, her small breaths filling the quiet. Noah nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She was amazing. She always sang to me when I was little, and she loved baking. We didn't have much, but she made every birthday special. She said, he hesitated, glancing down. She said I reminded her of someone. Alexander's chest tightened. Did she ever say who? No, Noah admitted. But sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, she'd cry while holding this picture. He gestured toward the photo of Annabelle that had remained on the coffee table since that first night. I think she missed you. Alexander swallowed hard, the weight of Noah's words settling over him. Annabelle had missed him, and yet she had never reached out. What had kept her away? The answer came 2 days later when Conrad delivered the final report. Annabelle's life had been far more difficult than Alexander had imagined. She had been threatened by someone from his past, a rival businessman who had discovered their relationship and used it to his advantage. Annabelle had left to protect Alexander and the child she carried, believing it was the only way to keep them safe. Alexander sat in his office, staring at the detailed report. His hands trembled slightly as he read the final lines. Annabelle was alive, but barely. She had been battling an illness for the past year, living in a small, run-down apartment on the edge of the city. She had no idea that Noah and Lily were safe, nor did she know they had found Alexander. He closed the file, his heart pounding. The truth was bittersweet. He had found his son, but he had lost precious years with both him and Annabelle. Still, there was time to make things right. He wasn't going to let the opportunity slip through his fingers. That evening, Alexander called Noah into his office. The boy looked nervous, but Alexander gestured for him to sit. I have something to tell you, Alexander began, his voice steady. I found your mother. She's alive. Noah's eyes widened, his lips parting in shock. You did. Alexander nodded. She's been through a lot, but I'm going to bring her back. We're going to bring her back. For the first time, Alexander saw a flicker of hope in Noah's eyes. It was fragile, but it was there. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known he was missing. The car ride to the edge of the city was silent except for the faint hum of the engine. Noah sat beside Alexander, his hands twisting nervously in his lap. Alexander glanced at the boy from time to time, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He had spent the night planning the visit, ensuring that every detail was handled delicately. Conrad had located Annabelle's apartment and confirmed her condition. It wasn't good. She was weak, battling an illness that had taken a toll, but she was alive. That knowledge had set Alexander's resolve. He would not fail her again. As they pulled up to a small, run-down building, Noah stared out the window, his wide eyes filled with both hope and fear. The structure was a stark contrast to the towering penthouse they had left behind. Its faded paint and crumbling bricks seemed to mirror the hardship Annabelle must have endured. Alexander parked the car and turned to Noah. Are you ready? He asked gently. Noah nodded, though his hands continued to twist nervously. What if she doesn't want to see us? He whispered. Alexander placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. She will. She loves you, Noah. She always has. They climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, their footsteps echoing in the dimly lit hallway. Alexander could feel Noah's tension beside him, the boy's small frame rigid with anticipation. When they reached the door, Alexander hesitated, his hand hovering over the peeling wood. He hadn't seen Annabelle in over a decade. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew they couldn't turn back now. He knocked softly, the sound reverberating through the quiet corridor. Moments passed with no response. He knocked again, a bit louder this time. Just as he was about to consider trying again later, the door creaked open. Annabelle stood there, her face pale and thin, but her eyes, those same eyes he had fallen in love with all those years ago, widened in shock. For a moment, she didn't move, as if frozen in time. Then her gaze shifted, landing on Noah. Her hand flew to her mouth, a strangled sob escaping her lips. Noah, she whispered, her voice cracking. Mom! Noah's voice broke as he rushed forward, throwing his arms around her. She clung to him, her frail body trembling as tears streamed down her face. Alexander watched the reunion, his chest tightening with emotion. He had imagined this moment so many times, but nothing could have prepared him for the raw intensity of it. After a long moment, Annabelle looked up at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "Alexander," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You found him." He nodded, stepping forward cautiously. "I did. And now I've found you too." Annabelle's knees seemed to give out, and Alexander caught her before she could fall. He guided her to a worn-out sofa in the tiny living room, where she sank down, still holding tightly to Noah. Lily, who had been nestled in Alexander's arms during the walk up, began to stir, her small whimpers breaking the emotional silence. Annabelle's eyes widened as she noticed the baby. "Lily?" she asked, her voice trembling. She reached out, her hands shaking, and Alexander carefully placed the baby in her arms. Annabelle cradled her daughter, tears streaming down her face as she kissed the baby's forehead. For a while, no one spoke. The room was filled with the quiet sounds of sniffles and soft breaths. Finally, Annabelle looked up at Alexander, her voice hoarse. How did you find me?" "It wasn't easy," he admitted. "Noah came looking for help. He had your photo. I recognized you immediately." He paused, his throat tightening. "Why didn't you tell me, Annabelle? Why did you leave without a word?" She looked down, her fingers gently stroking Lily's cheek. "I wanted to," she said softly. "I wanted to tell you everything, but I couldn't. I was scared." "Scared of what?" Alexander pressed, though his tone remained gentle. Annabelle hesitated, her gaze flickering to Noah, who was watching her intently. "There were threats," she said finally. "People who wanted to hurt you, to hurt us. I thought leaving was the only way to protect you." To protect Noah. Alexander's jaw tightened. The report Conrad had given him had hinted at such threats, but hearing it from Annabelle herself made his anger flare. "You didn't have to do it alone," he said, his voice firm. "I could have protected you." She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes again. "I didn't want to risk it." And after a while, it felt like it was too late to go back. Alexander reached for her hand, his grip steady and warm. "It's not too late now," he said. "We're here. We're going to fix this." Annabelle looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. She wanted to believe him, but the years of struggle had left her wary. Still, the sight of Noah and Lily, safe and cared for, seemed to ease some of her doubts. Over the next few hours, they talked. Annabelle shared bits and pieces of her life after she left, and Alexander filled her in on the years she had missed. Noah sat close to his mother the entire time, as if afraid she might disappear again. Alexander could see the boy's walls beginning to come down, his trust slowly building. By the time evening fell, Annabelle was visibly exhausted. Alexander insisted on taking her back to the penthouse, where she could rest and recover. At first, she protested, but Noah's pleading eyes and Alexander's unwavering determination won her over. As they left the apartment, Alexander felt a sense of relief he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just that he had found Annabelle or that Noah was safe. It was the sense of a family beginning to form, fragile but real. When they returned to the penthouse, Annabelle stood in the living room, her eyes wide as she took in the luxurious space. This is incredible," she murmured. Alexander smiled softly. "It's just a place. What matters is that we're here together." Noah tugged on his mother's sleeve, his voice shy. "Does this mean we get to stay together now?" Annabelle knelt down, cupping his face in her hands. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're staying together." Alexander watched the scene, his heart full. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, of belonging. And as he looked at Annabelle, Noah, and Lily, he knew this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the penthouse began to feel less like a pristine monument to Alexander's success and more like a home. The once quiet, sterile rooms were now filled with the sound of life. Noah's laughter as he played with Lily, Annabelle's soft voice as she hummed lullabies, and the occasional crash of something breaking as Noah adjusted to the idea that nothing was too precious to touch. Alexander didn't mind. The noise, the activity. It reminded him of what he hadn't realized he was missing. Annabelle spent much of her time resting, regaining her strength under the care of a private doctor Alexander had brought in. Though she was still weak, her color had returned, and there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there the day they found her. She often watched Noah and Lily with quiet wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe they were safe and together again. One evening, Alexander returned home to find Annabelle in the kitchen, her delicate frame wrapped in a soft cardigan. She was leaning against the counter, watching Noah teach Lily how to stack blocks on the floor of the living room. He was speaking to her in a sing-song voice, his hands guiding hers gently. Annabelle turned to Alexander as he entered, her smile warm but tinged with uncertainty. "I wasn't sure if I should let them play here," she said softly. "This place is so beautiful, and I didn't want them to ruin anything." Alexander shook his head, setting down his briefcase. "Let them play. It's just a place, Annabelle. What's the point of it all if it's not filled with laughter?" Her expression softened, and for a moment, they simply stood there, watching the children. It felt almost surreal, this sense of normalcy. After a long pause, Annabelle spoke again, her voice hesitant. "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done, Alexander. I don't even know how to begin repaying you." He turned to her, his gaze steady. "You don't need to repay me. We're family, Annabelle. This is what we do for each other." Her eyes filled with tears, and she quickly looked away, pretending to busy herself with a cup of tea. Alexander didn't push her. He knew she needed time to adjust, to believe that she didn't have to shoulder everything on her own anymore. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Alexander found Annabelle sitting on the balcony, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The city lights stretched out before her, twinkling like stars. She didn't turn when she heard him approach, but she didn't flinch away either. "It's so quiet up here," she said, her voice carrying a hint of awe. "It feels like a different world." "It is," Alexander said, taking a seat beside her. "But I don't want you to feel like you're separate from it. This can be your world too." Annabelle hesitated, her hands gripping the edges of the blanket. "It's hard to believe this is real. For so long, I thought we'd never be together again. I was so sure I'd made the right choice by leaving. But now, looking at Noah and Lily, I wonder if I just made things harder for all of us." Alexander placed a hand over hers, his touch gentle but firm. "You did what you thought was best. No one can fault you for that. But now we have a chance to start over, to build something new. Together." She looked at him then, her eyes searching his face as if looking for some sign of doubt. Whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her, because she nodded slowly. "I want that," she said softly. "I really do." The next morning, Alexander called a family meeting. Noah sat cross-legged on the couch, his face serious as he tried to mimic the adults, while Lily babbled happily in Annabelle's lap. Alexander cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "I've been thinking about the future," he began, his gaze moving between them, "about what comes next for all of us. I want us to stay together, but it's going to take work. There will be challenges, especially as we figure out how to live as a family." Noah tilted his head. "You mean like rules?" Alexander smiled. "Something like that. But more than that, it's about supporting each other, being honest, and finding ways to make this home feel like it belongs to all of us." Annabelle looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "What do you have in mind?" "Well," Alexander said, "for starters, Noah, I'd like to get you back in school. And Annabelle, I want you to focus on getting better. No more worrying about how you're going to take care of everything. That's my job now." Noah frowned. "But I don't want to leave you guys. What if something happens while I'm gone?" Annabelle reached over, brushing a hand through his hair. "Nothing's going to happen, sweetheart. We're safe now." Alexander nodded in agreement. "And school isn't just about being away from us. It's about giving you a chance to learn, to grow, and to make friends. You deserve that, Noah." The boy hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but only if I can come home right after." "Deal," Alexander said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a rhythm. Annabelle began to regain her strength, and Noah adjusted to life as a regular kid, though he still kept a protective eye on Lily whenever he was home. Alexander found himself looking forward to evenings spent with them, the simple moments of sharing dinner or watching a movie together. One night, as they sat around the dinner table, Noah looked up from his plate, his eyes shining. Do you think we could call this place home now?" Annabelle reached over to squeeze his hand. "It already is, sweetheart." Alexander felt a lump rise in his throat as he looked at them. For years, he had lived in a world of success and solitude, convinced it was enough. But now, with Annabelle, Noah, and Lily, he realized what had been missing all along. It wasn't just about finding them, it was about finding himself in the process. As they laughed and talked into the night, Alexander knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Together, they could face whatever came next. Life began to settle into a rhythm that felt almost natural, though each day brought small challenges and adjustments for everyone. Annabelle was growing stronger with each passing week, her once fragile frame filling out as she regained her health. Alexander had spared no expense in ensuring she received the best care, but it wasn't just the doctors or the medication. It was the presence of family, the laughter of her children, and the safety she finally felt that were truly healing her. Noah started school again, a milestone that brought a mixture of excitement and anxiety. He had been out of the classroom for so long that he worried about fitting in, about being the new kid in a world that seemed far removed from the one he had known. Alexander took the morning off work to drive him on his first day, sensing how much the moment meant. "You'll be great," Alexander reassured him as they pulled into the school parking lot. Noah stared at the building, his small hands clutching the straps of his backpack. "Just be yourself. You're stronger than you think." Noah nodded, though his face remained serious. He hesitated for a moment, then looked up at Alexander. "You'll pick me up, right? Right after school?" Alexander smiled. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The adjustment wasn't easy, but day by day, Noah began to find his place. He made a few friends, warmed to his teachers, and even started talking about joining the soccer team. Each evening, he would come home and excitedly recount his day, his face lighting up in a way Alexander had never seen before. For Annabelle, the adjustment was slower. She still carried the weight of years spent struggling, the instinct to take on every burden herself. At times, she found it hard to accept the help Alexander so willingly offered. But he was patient, never pushing her too far but always reminding her that she wasn't alone anymore. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Annabelle spoke hesitantly. "It feels strange," she admitted, her hands folded tightly in her lap, "letting someone else take care of things. I've spent so many years doing everything on my own, depending on anyone else. It's hard." Alexander leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I understand," he said, "but you don't have to carry everything alone anymore. I'm here, Annabelle. We're in this together." She looked at him, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." As the weeks turned into months, their little family began to feel more whole. Alexander couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it happened, but somewhere along the way, he stopped thinking of Noah and Lily as Annabelle's children and started thinking of them as his own. He found himself looking forward to the small, mundane moments, helping Noah with his homework, rocking Lily to sleep, even watching Annabelle fuss over dinner preparations. One Saturday morning, Noah bounded into the kitchen, his energy infectious. "Can we go to the park today?" he asked, his eyes bright with excitement. "There's a soccer game and I want to watch." Alexander glanced at Annabelle, who was feeding Lily in her high chair. She smiled and nodded. "I think that sounds like a wonderful idea," she said. "Fresh air would do us all good." The park was bustling with families, the crisp spring air filled with the sounds of children laughing and birds chirping. Noah immediately ran toward the soccer field, his enthusiasm contagious. Alexander and Annabelle followed more slowly, Lily nestled in Alexander's arms. As they watched Noah from the sidelines, Annabelle leaned closer to Alexander. "He's really starting to come out of his shell," she said, her voice filled with pride. "I haven't seen him this happy in years." Alexander nodded, his gaze never leaving the boy. "He's incredible," he said. "They both are." Annabelle turned to him, her expression soft. You've made such a difference in their lives, Alexander. I don't know if I'll ever be able to thank you enough." He looked at her, his eyes steady. "You don't need to thank me. They've changed my life just as much as I've changed theirs. Maybe more." In that moment, as the sunlight filtered through the trees and the laughter of children filled the air, Alexander felt something shift inside him. It was more than just happiness. It was contentment, the kind of deep, abiding peace he hadn't known he was missing. That evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Noah spoke up, his voice hesitant but determined. "Do you think we could start doing something, like family nights?" he asked. "You know, like playing games or watching movies together. My friends at school do it, and it sounds fun." Annabelle smiled warmly. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Noah." Alexander nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "Me too. Let's make it a tradition." The first family night was a simple affair. A board game spread out on the living room floor, popcorn in bowls, and Lily giggling in her playpen. They laughed and teased each other, the sound of their joy filling the penthouse. For Alexander, it was a revelation. He had spent so many years chasing success, believing that wealth and power were the ultimate goals. But now, surrounded by the people he loved, he realized that this messy, imperfect, beautiful life was what truly mattered. As the night wore on and the children drifted off to sleep, Alexander and Annabelle sat together on the couch, a comfortable silence settling between them. Annabelle rested her head on his shoulder, and he felt a sense of completeness he hadn't thought possible. "You've given us so much," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "A home, a future, a chance to be a family." Alexander wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "You've given me just as much," he said. "Maybe more. I never knew how empty my life was until you and the kids came into it." Annabelle looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I think we've all saved each other." As they sat there, the city lights twinkling outside the window and the sound of their children's soft breaths filling the air, Alexander knew she was right. Together, they had found something worth fighting for, something worth holding on to. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The following weeks brought a steady rhythm to their lives, filled with the kind of small, meaningful moments that Alexander had once overlooked. He woke each morning to the sound of Lily babbling from her crib and Noah clattering around the kitchen, always determined to make breakfast for everyone despite his limited cooking skills. Annabelle, still gaining strength, had taken to spending her afternoons in the sunlit study, reading or sketching while Lily napped nearby. It was a calm, almost idyllic existence, one that Alexander found himself cherishing more with each passing day. One afternoon, Alexander decided it was time to introduce Noah and Lily to something new. After picking Noah up from school, he took both children to a nearby park with a sprawling garden, its paths winding through flower beds and under tall, shady trees. Lily giggled as she rode in her stroller, her tiny hands reaching for every leaf and petal within her grasp. "Why are we here?" Noah asked, his eyes scanning the garden with curiosity. Alexander crouched beside him, pointing toward a quiet bench under a massive oak tree. "I used to come here when I was younger," he said. "Whenever I needed to think or just get away from everything, this was my spot." Noah frowned slightly. "You had stuff to get away from? You're, rich." Alexander chuckled softly, ruffling the boy's hair. "Money doesn't make everything easy, Noah. Sometimes it makes things harder. Back then, I didn't have a lot of people I could talk to, so I came here. It reminded me of what was important." Noah nodded slowly, as if trying to process this new layer of his father figure. "It's nice here," he admitted after a moment. "Quiet." "It is," Alexander agreed. "And now it's ours to share." They spent the afternoon wandering the garden, playing hide-and-seek among the trees and letting Lily crawl around on the grass. Annabelle had stayed home to rest, and Alexander couldn't wait to tell her about how much the children had enjoyed the outing. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of balance, of stability that he hadn't realized he craved. That night, as they gathered around the dinner table, Noah brought up something that caught Alexander and Annabelle by surprise. "There's a family day coming up at school," he said, poking at his mashed potatoes with his fork. "All the kids are supposed to bring someone, like their parents. Annabelle set down her glass of water, her brow furrowing slightly. When is it? Next Friday, Noah said. He hesitated, his voice lowering. I was wondering if you both could come. Is that okay? Annabelle's expression softened immediately, and she reached across the table to squeeze Noah's hand. Of course, sweetheart. We wouldn't miss it. Alexander nodded. We'll be there. Noah's face lit up with a mixture of relief and excitement, and for the rest of the meal, he chattered on about the different activities planned for the day. Alexander couldn't help but smile as he listened. It was a small thing, but to Noah, it was everything. The week leading up to the family day was busy but filled with a sense of anticipation. Annabelle helped Noah pick out an outfit, while Alexander rearranged his schedule to ensure he could take the entire day off. When Friday finally arrived, the three of them stood at the school gates, Lily in her stroller and Noah bouncing on his toes with nervous energy. Inside, the school was bustling with activity. Families milled about, children running to and from classrooms, and the air buzzed with excitement. Noah led them to his homeroom, where his teacher greeted them warmly. It's so nice to finally meet you, she said, shaking Alexander's hand. Noah talks about you all the time. Alexander glanced at Noah, whose cheeks turned pink. He does he? The teacher laughed. He's a great kid, and he's been doing so well in class. The morning passed quickly, with activities ranging from art projects to group games in the gymnasium. Noah seemed more confident than Alexander had ever seen him, introducing them to his friends and proudly showing off his work. Annabelle beamed with pride, her hand often resting on Alexander's arm as they watched Noah thrive. After lunch, the families gathered in the auditorium for a special presentation. Each child had prepared something to share, a drawing, a poem, or a story about their family. Noah had been tight-lipped about what he was planning, insisting it was a surprise. When it was his turn, Noah stood nervously at the microphone, holding a piece of paper in his hands. He cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the audience until they landed on Alexander and Annabelle. I wrote something, he began, his voice shaky but determined. It's about my family. Alexander felt Annabelle's grip on his arm tighten as Noah began to read. I used to think a family was just about who you were born to, but now I know it's more than that. A family is people who care about you, who make you feel safe and loved. It's people who stick by you, no matter what. I didn't think I'd ever have that again, but then I found them. My mom, my sister, and my dad. Noah's voice wavered slightly on the last word, and Alexander's breath caught in his chest. Annabelle wiped at her eyes, her face a mixture of pride and emotion. They've given me more than I ever thought I could have, Noah continued. They've given me a home, and I just want to say thank you for everything. The room erupted into applause as Noah stepped away from the microphone, his face glowing with both pride and relief. Alexander stood, unable to contain his emotion, and met Noah halfway, pulling him into a tight hug. You're incredible, Alexander whispered, his voice thick. Absolutely incredible. For the rest of the day, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Noah's words. They echoed in his mind, filling him with a sense of purpose he hadn't known he needed. This family, this life, they were his now, and he would do everything in his power to keep them safe and happy. That evening, as they sat together in the living room, Alexander looked around at the people who had become his world. Annabelle was curled up beside him, Lily asleep in her arms, and Noah sat on the floor, flipping through a book. This, Alexander thought, was what it meant to be home. The days after Family Day felt lighter, as if a cloud had lifted and left behind nothing but sunshine. Noah was glowing with pride, often recounting his speech to anyone who would listen. Even Lily, in her small way, seemed to pick up on the shift in energy, babbling happily as she crawled around the living room. For Alexander, the joy was infectious. He found himself smiling more, laughing more, and appreciating even the smallest moments. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Annabelle brought up a topic that had been lingering in her mind. I've been thinking, she began, glancing at Alexander, about the future. Alexander set down his fork, giving her his full attention. What about it? Annabelle hesitated, her hands fidgeting slightly. I've been feeling stronger lately, and I think it's time I started working again. I want to contribute, Alexander. I don't want to feel like I'm just taking. Before Alexander could respond, Noah chimed in. But you don't have to work, Mom. You take care of Lily and me. That's enough. Annabelle smiled at him, her eyes soft. I know, sweetheart, but I've always loved creating, and I think it's important for me to do something for myself too. Besides, it's not just about money. It's about feeling like I'm part of something. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. He understood where she was coming from, though the idea of her taking on too much too soon made him uneasy. What do you have in mind? He asked. I used to love designing, Annabelle said, her voice growing more confident. Clothes, patterns, little things like that. Maybe I could start small, create a few pieces and see where it goes. Alexander's mind immediately began spinning with possibilities. I think that's a wonderful idea, he said. And if you need any resources, space, materials, anything, you just let me know. I'll make sure you have everything you need. Annabelle reached across the table, placing her hand over his. Thank you, she said softly, for believing in me. Over the next few weeks, Annabelle threw herself into her designs. Alexander cleared out a spare room in the penthouse, transforming it into a studio filled with fabrics, sketches, and a sewing machine he had specially ordered for her. Watching her work brought a new kind of happiness to their home. Her energy was contagious, inspiring even Noah to pitch in, though his help often resulted in more chaos than progress. One evening, as Annabelle worked late in her studio, Alexander found himself sitting with Noah in the living room. The boy was sprawled on the couch, flipping through a book about soccer tactics. Alexander had always marveled at Noah's curiosity, his hunger to learn and explore. Do you think I'll ever be as good as the kids on the team? Noah asked suddenly, looking up. Alexander set aside the report he'd been reading. You're already good, he said. But being part of a team isn't just about skill. It's about working together, trusting each other, and never giving up. Noah nodded, his expression thoughtful. I like that. Working together. It's one of the most important things you can learn, Alexander said. And it doesn't just apply to sports. It's something we do as a family too. The boy smiled, his face lighting up. I guess we make a pretty good team. Alexander chuckled. The best. As the days turned into weeks, their team only grew stronger. Annabelle's designs began to take shape, each piece reflecting her unique vision and talent. She often asked for Alexander's opinion, and though he claimed to know nothing about fashion, his encouragement meant the world to her. For Noah, soccer became a new passion, and Alexander made it a point to attend every practice and game, cheering louder than anyone else on the sidelines. But not everything was perfect. Annabelle still struggled with moments of doubt, especially when faced with memories of the years she had spent struggling alone. Noah, despite his progress, sometimes clung to old fears, as if afraid that their newfound happiness could be taken away at any moment. And Alexander, for all his efforts, still carried the weight of guilt for not finding them sooner. One night, as Alexander and Annabelle sat together on the balcony, the city lights twinkling around them, she spoke quietly. Do you ever think about what might have been? If things had happened differently? All the time, Alexander admitted. I wonder how much pain we could have avoided, how much time we could have saved. But then I think about where we are now. About Noah, Lily, you. And I wouldn't trade this for anything. Annabelle leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice soft. Neither would I. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in the quiet comfort of each other's presence. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was theirs, and it was more than enough. The following weekend, they decided to spend the day at the beach, a first for Lily and a rare treat for the rest of them. Noah raced ahead, his laughter carried on the breeze, while Alexander and Annabelle strolled behind, carrying the picnic basket and blanket. As they sat on the sand, watching Noah build a lopsided sandcastle and Lily giggle at the waves, Annabelle turned to Alexander. Do you ever wonder how we got here? How we managed to find each other again? Alexander looked at her, his gaze steady. I think it was meant to be, he said simply. No matter how long it took, no matter what we went through, we were always going to find our way back to each other. Annabelle smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You always know what to say. It's the truth, he replied, reaching for her hand. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light across the water, Alexander felt a deep sense of peace. They had come so far, and there was still so much ahead. But for now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The beach day became a cherished memory, one that lingered in their conversations and laughter for days afterward. Annabelle couldn't stop talking about the way Lily had squealed with delight every time the waves tickled her toes, and Noah proudly displayed the shell collection he had started that afternoon. Even Alexander, who usually kept his emotions reserved, found himself smiling at the thought of the carefree moments they had shared together. As life settled back into its rhythm, Annabelle threw herself even further into her work. Her designs were no longer just sketches and ideas. They were tangible pieces that reflected her creativity and passion. With Alexander's encouragement, she began reaching out to boutique owners and small retailers, sending samples and hoping for an opportunity. It was a daunting process, filled with moments of doubt and uncertainty, but Annabelle persevered. One evening, she received a call that changed everything. A boutique in the city had not only loved her designs but wanted to feature them as part of an upcoming spring collection. Annabelle was overjoyed, tears streaming down her face as she hugged Alexander tightly. "I couldn't have done this without you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, you could have," Alexander replied softly, "but I'm glad I was here to see you do it." The days leading up to the boutique's event were a whirlwind. Annabelle worked tirelessly, ensuring every detail of her pieces was perfect. Alexander supported her in every way he could, whether it was watching the children so she could focus or offering his insights on presentation and strategy. Even Noah got involved, excitedly helping her organize her workspace and adding his own youthful touch of creativity. The event itself was a resounding success. Annabelle's designs were met with admiration and enthusiasm, and several attendees placed orders on the spot. For the first time in years, Annabelle felt like she was stepping into a future she could be proud of, a future she had built with her own hands, supported by the people she loved most. That evening, as they celebrated at home with a quiet dinner, Annabelle looked around the table, her heart full. Lily was babbling happily in her high chair, smearing mashed potatoes on her face, while Noah animatedly recounted how he had helped sell her designs by talking to a boutique owner. Alexander sat beside her, his smile warm and steady, a silent reminder of the stability he had brought into their lives. "I can't believe how far we've come," Annabelle said softly, her voice almost drowned out by the chatter around her. Alexander reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "It's just the beginning, Annabelle. There's so much more ahead." She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know, and for the first time, I'm not afraid of it." But as they basked in their newfound success and happiness, life, as it often does, found a way to test their resolve. It began with a letter, one that arrived in an unassuming envelope on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. Annabelle opened it, her brow furrowing as she read the contents. By the time she reached the bottom of the page, her hands were trembling. "What is it?" Alexander asked, concern etched across his face as he stepped into the room. Annabelle handed him the letter, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's from someone claiming to know about Noah's father. They want to meet." Alexander's expression darkened as he read the letter. It was vague, unsigned, but its tone carried a weight that made his chest tighten. He glanced at Annabelle, who was visibly shaken. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "You're Noah's father." "There's no question about that." "There isn't," Alexander agreed, his voice firm. "But someone clearly thinks otherwise, or they're trying to stir up trouble. What do we do?" Annabelle asked, her eyes searching his for reassurance. Alexander set the letter down, his jaw tightening. "We find out who sent this and why. But first, we protect our family." Annabelle nodded, her trust in Alexander unshaken. He reached out to Conrad Miller, the investigator who had helped locate Annabelle months earlier. Conrad quickly began digging into the source of the letter, piecing together clues from the postmark and phrasing. In the meantime, Alexander took extra precautions, ensuring their home was secure and that Annabelle and the children were safe at all times. Noah, unaware of the tension brewing behind the scenes, continued to thrive. He had made friends at school, was excelling in his studies, and had even joined the soccer team as a midfielder. Watching him grow and flourish brought Alexander a sense of pride he hadn't known he was capable of. Yet, the looming shadow of the letter lingered in the back of his mind, a reminder that happiness could be fragile. A week later, Conrad returned with answers. The letter had been sent by a man named Peter Hargrove, someone Annabelle had briefly worked for years ago. He had no legitimate claim to Noah but had stumbled upon Annabelle's name while researching Alexander's growing influence. Realizing the connection, he had concocted the letter in a misguided attempt to exploit the situation for his own gain. "He's harmless," Conrad assured Alexander, "but he's also persistent. I'd recommend cutting him off entirely before he causes more trouble." Alexander wasted no time taking action. He had his legal team draft a cease and desist letter, warning Hargrove to stay away from his family or face legal consequences. It was a swift and decisive move, one that brought an immediate sense of relief to Annabelle. "I don't know how you do it," she said that evening as they sat together in the study. "You're always so calm, so in control." Alexander smiled faintly. "I wasn't always like this, but having you and the kids, it's given me something to fight for, something worth protecting." Annabelle leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," he promised, his voice steady. With the threat of Hargrove behind them, life slowly returned to normal. Annabelle continued to grow her business, expanding her reach and gaining recognition for her work. Noah's confidence soared, both on and off the soccer field, and he even began talking about what he wanted to be when he grew up. Lily, ever the light of their family, took her first steps one sunny afternoon, much to everyone's delight. Through it all, Alexander remained their anchor, the steady force that held them together. He had never imagined his life taking this path, but as he looked at the family they had built together, he knew it was exactly where he was meant to be. And so, with each passing day, their bond grew stronger, their love deeper, and their future brighter. Together, they had faced challenges and overcome them, proving that even in the face of adversity, the strength of family could shine through. For Alexander, Annabelle, Noah, and Lily, this was more than a second chance. It was the life they were always meant to have. As time went on, the family grew closer, their bonds deepening in ways that felt natural and unshakable. Alexander had always been a man of careful routine and control, but now his days were filled with joyful chaos. From helping Noah with school projects to watching Lily's determination as she tried to master new words, he found himself cherishing every moment. Annabelle, too, was thriving. Her designs had caught the attention of a prominent fashion blog, and orders were pouring in faster than she could manage. She had hired a part-time assistant to help with logistics, and the small studio Alexander had set up for her was now buzzing with activity. Despite the growing demands on her time, she never missed dinner with her family, and Alexander admired the balance she struck between her work and their home life. One evening, as they were gathered around the table, Noah announced he had some big news. His eyes sparkled with excitement, and his words spilled out in a rush. "Coach said I can try out for the travel team. If I make it, I'll get to play in tournaments all over the state." "That's incredible, Noah," Annabelle exclaimed, her smile lighting up her face. "When is the tryout?" "Next weekend," Noah replied, practically bouncing in his seat. "I've been practicing with Coach after school, and he thinks I have a good shot." Alexander nodded, pride swelling in his chest. "We'll be there to cheer you on." The week leading up to the tryouts was filled with anticipation. Noah spent every free moment practicing in the backyard, his determination unwavering. Alexander often joined him, passing the ball back and forth as they talked about strategies and techniques. Though Alexander had never played soccer himself, he enjoyed the chance to bond with Noah and see his passion firsthand. When the day of the tryouts arrived, the entire family piled into the car, the atmosphere charged with a mix of excitement and nerves. The soccer complex was buzzing with energy, filled with kids and parents milling about. Noah spotted his teammates and ran off to join them, while Alexander and Annabelle found seats in the stands with Lily perched on Annabelle's lap. As the tryouts began, Alexander's eyes never left the field. Noah moved with a confidence and skill that had clearly been honed through hours of practice. He wasn't the fastest player on the field, but he had a keen sense of teamwork, often passing the ball to set up his teammates for success. Alexander couldn't help but smile as he watched. Noah's leadership and determination were qualities he deeply admired. After what felt like hours, the tryouts finally ended. The coaches gathered the players together to announce the results, and Alexander held his breath as Noah's name was called. The boy's face lit up with pure joy, and he ran over to his family, his grin stretching from ear to ear. "I made it!" he shouted, throwing his arms around Annabelle and Lily before turning to Alexander. "I made the team." Alexander knelt down, pulling Noah into a hug. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You earned this." The ride home was filled with celebratory chatter, Noah detailing every moment of the tryouts and his plans for the upcoming season. Annabelle joined in his excitement, her laughter ringing out as Lily babbled in response to the cheerful energy around her. Alexander drove in contented silence, his heart full. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of practices, games, and travel, but the family embraced the chaos. They attended every match, cheering loudly from the sidelines as Noah played his heart out. Each game brought its own set of challenges, but Noah faced them with the same determination that had carried him through so much already. One evening, after a particularly tough game, Noah sat on the porch steps with Alexander, his face flushed with exertion. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the yard as they sipped lemonade and watched Lily toddle around the grass. "Do you think I'll ever be good enough to play professionally?" Noah asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Alexander looked at him, his expression serious. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to, but it's not just about being good enough. It's about loving what you do and giving it everything you have." Noah nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "I do love it, even when it's hard." "Then keep going," Alexander said, "because that love will carry you further than talent ever could." Noah smiled, his confidence renewed. "Thanks, Dad." The word hit Alexander like a wave, and for a moment, he was stunned. It wasn't the first time Noah had called him Dad, but each time felt like a gift, a reminder of how far they had come. "I'll always be here for you," Alexander said, his voice steady. The sound of Annabelle calling them in for dinner broke the moment, and they headed inside, the warmth of the house wrapping around them like a hug. As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and stories from the day. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Alexander found Annabelle in the study, sketching a new design. She looked up as he entered, her smile soft and welcoming. "Another masterpiece?" he teased, leaning against the doorframe. "Just an idea," she replied, setting her pencil down. "How's Noah?" "Happy," Alexander said. "And exhausted." Annabelle laughed, the sound light and full of joy. "He's growing up so fast." "He is," Alexander agreed, "but he's turning into an incredible young man." Annabelle's expression grew thoughtful, and she reached for Alexander's hand. "That's because of you. You've given him so much, Alexander. Stability, love, a real home. He wouldn't be where he is without you." Alexander squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with emotion. "We've done this together, Annabelle. All of it." She leaned into him, her voice soft. "Together, always." As they sat there in the quiet of the study, surrounded by the life they had built, Alexander felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. They had faced challenges and overcome them, and now they were stronger for it. Their family, once fractured and uncertain, had become a beacon of hope and love. And for Alexander, there was no greater joy than knowing they had found their way to each other, against all odds. The arrival of the holiday season brought a renewed sense of warmth and togetherness to their home. Annabelle took to decorating the penthouse with a mix of elegance and charm, filling it with twinkling lights, wreaths, and candles that cast a soft glow in the evenings. Noah threw himself into the festive spirit, eagerly helping Annabelle hang ornaments on the tree and coaxing Lily to place the occasional bauble on the lowest branches. Alexander, though busy with end-of-year work commitments, made sure to be part of every moment he could, knowing how much it meant to all of them. One evening, as they sat by the fire sipping hot cocoa, Noah had an idea. "We should have a Christmas party," he declared, his eyes bright with excitement. "We could invite all the people who've helped us this year, like Coach, Mom's assistant, and even Mr. Conrad." Annabelle looked at Alexander, her expression curious. "What do you think?" Alexander nodded, smiling. "I think it's a wonderful idea, a chance to show our appreciation and celebrate together." In the weeks leading up to Christmas, the family worked together to plan the party. Annabelle handled the decorations and food. Noah created handmade invitations with his usual enthusiasm, and even Lily contributed by toddling around with ribbons and bows. Alexander coordinated the guest list, ensuring that everyone important to their journey was included. The night of the party arrived, and the penthouse was alive with the sounds of laughter and music. Guests mingled in the warmly lit rooms, enjoying Annabelle's delicious treats and the festive atmosphere. Noah flitted from one group to another, proudly introducing his family to his friends and Coach. Lily, dressed in a tiny red dress, was the star of the evening, charming everyone with her giggles and wide-eyed wonder. Annabelle stood by the tree, talking with her assistant, when Alexander approached, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. He handed one to her, his smile soft. "You've outdone yourself," he said. "This place looks incredible." Annabelle blushed slightly, a habit she hadn't entirely outgrown. "I couldn't have done it without you. Or Noah. He's been the real star." "He gets that from you," Alexander replied, his voice filled with affection. As the evening continued, Alexander found himself reflecting on how much their lives had changed over the past year. It was hard to believe that less than 12 months ago, he had been a man consumed by work and routine, unaware of the family he was missing. Now, surrounded by laughter and love, he couldn't imagine life any other way. Toward the end of the night, as the guests began to leave, Noah pulled Alexander aside. The boy's expression was serious, his usual confidence tinged with a hint of nerves. "Dad," Noah began, his voice quiet, "there's something I want to do. Something special for Mom." Alexander crouched slightly to meet Noah's gaze. "What is it?" Noah hesitated, then held out a small box wrapped in gold paper. "I want to give her this, but I was hoping you could help me." Alexander took the box, his brow furrowing slightly. "What's inside?" Noah smiled shyly. "It's a necklace. I saved up my allowance and bought it last week. I want her to know how much she means to me, how much I love her." Alexander felt a lump rise in his throat. He placed a hand on Noah's shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "She's going to love it, and I'll be right there with you." Together, they approached Annabelle, who was now sitting by the fire with Lily asleep in her arms. She looked up as they neared, her smile soft and full of contentment. "Mom," Noah began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I wanted to give you something, to say thank you for everything." Annabelle's brow furrowed in curiosity as Noah handed her the box. She shifted Lily gently into Alexander's arms and carefully unwrapped the gift. When she opened the box and saw the delicate silver necklace inside, a pendant shaped like a heart, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Noah," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's beautiful." Noah smiled, his confidence returning. "You've always taken care of us, even when things were hard. I just wanted you to know how much we love you." Annabelle pulled him into a tight embrace, her tears falling freely now. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything." Alexander watched the scene, his chest tightening with emotion. He glanced down at Lily, who stirred slightly in her sleep, and then back at Annabelle and Noah. This was his family, imperfect, resilient, and deeply connected. He had never felt more grateful. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the children were tucked into bed, Alexander and Annabelle stood by the fire, the glow of the embers casting soft shadows on their faces. Annabelle fingered the necklace around her neck, her smile serene. "Did you know about this?" she asked, her eyes sparkling as she looked at Alexander. "I might have," he admitted, his lips twitching in a smile. "But it was all Noah's idea." Annabelle sighed softly, her gaze distant. "I can't believe how much things have changed. How much we've changed. Alexander stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her. It's been a journey, he said, but I wouldn't trade a single moment of it. She looked up at him, her expression tender. Neither would I. You've given us so much, Alexander. A home, a life, and most of all, love. You've given me the same, he replied. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving how much you mean to me. They stood there in silence, holding each other as the fire crackled softly. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the city in a quiet stillness. Inside, the warmth of their love filled the room, a testament to the strength of family and the power of second chances. For Alexander, Annabelle, Noah, and Lily, this was more than just a holiday season. It was a celebration of everything they had built together. And as the snow continued to fall, they knew their story was just beginning, a promise of even brighter days to come. Imagine finding, against all odds, what was missing to complete your life. How would you react to discovering that love and family can emerge in the most unexpected moments? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, don't forget to check out the next videos on the channel. We have even more moving stories to warm your heart. Are you ready to be inspired again?